Hello everyone. In this video we are going to talk about file I/O, input and output from and to a file, and we are going to work on two different types of file, text files and Excel files. The two kind of files that most of the time contain data. So if we want to if we want to open and read and write to text files, we don't need any module. For Excel files, we need this guy called OpenYXL. We need to have it and install it, and then you can work with Excel files. So here, first let's work on a text file. So when you open a text file, the command is called open, and you pass to it the name of the file, the full address, if it's not in the same folder as this Python. And then you have to pass to it the type of permission. Do you want to read? Do you want to write? Do you want to append? Do you want to do both, or what? So if you just pass R, it's for reading. If you just pass W, it's for overwriting. And if you say A, that's for appending. And if you add plus, basically you're having typically more than one task. So W plus means read and write, but the writing with the W is going to be overwriting existing data. If you say A plus, you can read and you can append. And append means you do not overwrite. You're going to add your new content to the end of the file. Okay, so if you don't want to get rid of the previous data, use append, do not use write. So here I'm going to open this text file, this guy here, that has 3 rows of data. Each row has 6 numbers. And I'm going to read this data and show it on the screen. So if I go back to my Python code, so I'm going to open this file and create an object, my file, that is this, my data text file, and my text file is again in the same folder as my Python, so I don't need to provide full address. Open it for reading only, and then I use the command, the method read for the my file object, and I ask it to read 6 characters for me, and then go ahead and print it, right? So if I go ahead and run this for you, you see that it read 6 characters and it showed it. And you might say, well, these are only 3. You're right, but remember the spaces are also characters. So the only thing that you would read here is only the first 3 numbers, 1, 2, and 3. So this guy here is 6 characters. And the other interesting thing that happens is this. Then I say, okay, fine, go ahead and read the rest of it for me. If I don't pass any number to the read method, it is going to read whatever it is going to read it. It's going to read all the content. The only problem is this. When I read the first 6 characters, when I start opening, my cursor is right here at the top left corner. When I read the 6th character, my cursor comes right here before 4. So when I ask it to read the data, it's not going to read from 1 to 18. It's going to read from 4 to 18. It's going to read this much. Okay, so every time you read, if you don't close the file and reopen it, your cursor is going to be at the place that the last command basically positioned it, not going to go back to the beginning, right? And this is what you can see here in this output, that now I read from 4 to 18, and using this part, and I'm going to show it. Okay, and whenever you're done reading data from a file, always close that file, always close that object. Never leave it open, and that is going to cause you problems. Okay, good. The other way that you can read the data, other than read with so many characters or read everything, is you can read basically line by line. Okay, and that method is called read lines. So this method of read lines, basically you open the file for reading and then ask it to read all of the data, but line by line. So you store it in this variable data that has lines of reading, and then you can use a for loop and say for line in data, go ahead and print line. Okay, so this way you're going to go line by line, and you don't need to know how many characters are in each line. You just read the whole data in one row and then print it using a for loop later. Okay, so that's another way to read, using basically read lines instead of read and characters. If you want to write to a file, then you can open it with W or A. In this case, I want to append it, not eliminate the previous data, so I use A, and I use plus as well in case you want to read something, but in this case I don't want to, so I can just use A. I don't need A plus, so I can just use A. And then here I use the write method and write whatever I want, and it will be added to the end of the data. So right here at the end of this data, I'm gonna add that text which says basically test line added. And then I add one blank line in the file and then close the file. So that is what happened here. As you can see, basically now I have added with this method, I have added basically this extra line to the text file. So when I read line by line, I read this, and I read what? I read this one. So let me go ahead and run this one more time for you. But before that, I want to make sure that, yeah, you see this one is already added. So let me delete it and do it again. So you can see right now there is nothing. When I do this part of the code, that's where I add that line. If I run it one more time, you're going to get one more of these. So as many times as you run, you're going to get more and more of this line added to after 18. So here you see the file had only data and numbers. Now I run it, and you can see that now as you go back to the text file, you see that this part is added because of that write command. And then when I read line by line, then you have, of course, basically this line, you have this line, you have this line, and these three are all that you have in that text file. Okay, so this is what reading, writing, opening, closing, appending everything from a text file, either by number of characters, the whole content in one chunk, or line by line. The next topic is an Excel file. How do you communicate with an Excel file? This time I have this Excel file where the data for X is stored from cell A2 to A8 and Y is B2 to B8. And then these are just titles. So I want to read this X, I want to read this Y, and then plot Y versus X, right? So I want to do several things here, right? Read file IO as well as plotting, which is a good practice here. So here is what I will do in my code. First thing is, from that module open YXL, I use the method called load workbook. This is gonna open my Excel file, and I provide the name of the Excel file. Again, it's in the same address, the same folder that the file is .py. And then I get the active sheet. So I go to the active sheet. How? I use this object that I created from the opening the Excel file, and then I use the method called .active to give me the sheet for the active sheet, right? So if there is another sheet here, sheet 2, if this is the active one, if this is the one that is open, then it's going to be sheet 2. If this is open, then it's going to be what? Sheet 1. So it depends on which one of them you activate and you save and close, right? That is going to be your active sheet. If there is only one, then of course that is the only sheet that you have, so it's going to be sheet 1. So here you get your active sheet, and once you get it, here you can have this methods called max row and max column to give you the maximum rows and the maximum column of data in your Excel file. Now here I can just pass a number, but it's good, interesting to see how good this method works. So it tells you what is the maximum row that you have data in and what is the maximum column that you have data in. And so here I use those methods, max row and max column, and I'm going to show them to you so you can see. It says the max row is 8, the max column is 2, and you clearly can see this is the case. This is column 2 and this is row 8. So my data at best goes to what? To B8, right? Column 2, row 8. And that's interesting. Here you can use it in for loop. You can use it to initialize X and Y. So here I initialize my X and Y with a bunch of zeros, and then I fill them in using a for loop. So you see here I created a bunch of zeros, as many as 7 data, that I have, right? In here, and then with NP zeros, and then I go and say for II in range from 2 to row plus 1. Remember, your row is 8, row plus 1 is 9, but the range command always goes to this number minus 1. So it only really goes to 8. So you go from 2 to what? To 8 with a step of 1. So this is basically going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And these are exactly these row numbers that I need to read data from. So I say for I from 2 to 8 with a step of 1, go ahead and for this active sheet that you have, go to some cell. Which cell? The cell that the row of it is equal to I. So right now I is 2, so go to row 2 and column 1 and get the data from it. And how do you get the data? From that cell object, use dot value method to create what? To create X. And then store it in the appropriate location for X. You see, when I starts at 2, the data is going to be written to X0, which is the beginning of X. And similarly, now you go to column 2 and the same row, and you get the value method to get you the value for Y. You store it, and once you have the X and Y read in the for loop, you can go ahead and create a plot, which is basically this plot here. There we go. Right? So you clearly see how to open an Excel file, how to get the active sheet, how to get the range of rows and columns, how to read the value using a for loop, and then do whatever you want to it. Okay, so here to read the data, you have to use a for loop, and that's all you need to do. And for Excel files, you do not need to open and close. You just load the worksheet, and that's all you need to do. So hopefully this video was useful to you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you.